Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are talking Tolumnia orchids, specifically why I believe Tolumnias are the best orchid and even houseplant for your home. So I'm gonna lobby a little bit for them today. Not that I have any vested interest in the wholesale of Tolumnias all around the world. No, I don't sell orchids. I don't even sell my orchids and never have. I just really like them, and my secret agenda is to make them popular so that nurseries stock them more, and there is interest in creating new hybrids with them because they are actually one of the easiest orchids to hybridize. Don't imagine you're gonna get seed and put it in the ground and it's gonna grow. No, it's still an epiphytic plant. Whatever applies to Phalaenopsis, propagation through seed-wise applies to them as well, but they do grow very fast. So it's not really all that hard to propagate them if you are a talented hybridizer. So that is the secret interest that I have with this video, and furthermore, give you some details about these plants if any of you don't know about them. I hope this video teaches you a thing or two and maybe give them a try. I think you're really going to enjoy them. So before we start, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it. Why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week and it's completely free, but if you're feeling a little extra about it, consider further supporting my channel by either becoming a member, using the affiliate links down below, checking out the merch, or using the super thanks option below my videos. Righty! Let us start. I have a list and I don't have my phone with me. Hold on. I do actually make lists of the things that I want to talk about. I do have some cons as well. I'm gonna talk about them at the end of the video. Nothing is perfect. Tolumnias are not perfect, but all of the other benefits I think overweigh the downsides. Right, let us start with affordability. These orchids are generally affordable in comparison to other orchids, even in comparison to mini Phalaenopsis. I find that many times Tolumnias are actually cheaper. The price will of course depend on the location. Maybe in some regions they are much easier to find, but in other regions they need to be imported, and that's a whole different story. Prices vary, but I've never had to pay anything more than 10 euros for a Tolumnia. I bought them anywhere from 7 euros to 10 euros. Maybe 10.5, something like that. So definitely I'm not saying they're the cheapest plant out there. You can buy Phytonias for 2 euros or something. No, but for an orchid, which are typically more expensive than other plants, yes, it is a very affordable orchid, which can be the entry point in collecting orchids if you don't have a big budget, but you want bang for the buck pretty much. Because trust me, these orchids offer a really nice show for the amount of money you will pay on them. As a little side note, sometimes, rarely, some sellers do like to take advantage of people who don't really know prices. So, even though yes, prices vary, if you ever find these orchids at a suspiciously high price, check multiple sources in your region. Check nurseries, private sellers, so on and so forth, to get a little bit of a vibe of how much this orchid should cost in your region. So if any seller tries to overprice these orchids, you will definitely know for sure. So don't buy the first orchid you see, just check a few sources and see the prices first. Second greatest thing about them, they are super tiny and they fit pretty much anywhere. As you can see, I have them in a detolf shelf. I like using these shelves with my orchids, but they definitely fit on a windowsill. What was that accent? On a windowsill, some other smaller shelves. Even if there is a little bit of variety within the hybrids, you'll never have a Tolumnia that is, I don't know, half a meter tall or something like that. It's not gonna grow like that. What Tolumnias typically do is bushen up, but even so, they don't really become super incredibly bushy like some other orchids. So because of this, I find them to be absolutely versatile. You can choose the location you want to keep them in, regardless if you have natural light there or not, because as we're gonna see later in the list, they do grow very well under artificial light as well. So if you have a place that just has a lamp or something, but it's not a very big place, that could be a good place for a Tolumnia, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. Do we see how many Tolumnias I have here? I have 9 in a 30 by 30 centimeters or so low shelf here. How cool is that? And they are mature. They are not seedlings or anything. These guys are mature. Some of them are quite old. Can we see? So talk about saving space, am I right? Next up, they are quite low maintenance. You don't need to trim them. You don't need to stake them. You don't need to tie them. You don't need to hang them. You don't need to do anything. Pretty much ever on them, unless you see some dried leaves or anything that you want to remove, or maybe some blemishes that you don't like. I don't see any reason for you to do anything to these orchids. They do not require trellising, staking, putting a pole, all of that nonsense, nothing like that. They will grow towards the light, yes. If the light is coming from one side, like from a window, you might have to rotate them maybe from time to time if you don't like them growing too much on one side. But hey, that's the nature of an epiphytic orchid. It will grow towards the light, but it doesn't really do so very dramatically, not even as much as a phalaenopsis. It doesn't really lean over all that much, although it can. If the light is very one-sided, it can lean, but just rotate them from time to time. If you have light from above, you won't have issues. I never rotate these plants. This is the shape they naturally take, given the light is coming from above. And that's about it. Not even the flower spikes do I stake. Did I ever stake a Tolumnia flower spike? I don't think so. No, they're strong enough to hold their own flowers and not tip over, generally speaking. So yeah, there you go. Other than maybe brushing them from dust from time to time, I don't see what else you can do for these orchids to keep them tidy. They're naturally tidy, and I do believe quite appealing to look at as a houseplant. Next up, Tolumnias grow slow, but mature fast. Now, here's the thing. We all get very excited when we hear a plant grows fast. Yay! That will wear off in time. It will get very old very fast, trust me, when you will not have time to devote to your houseplants. Now you might have time, maybe tomorrow you won't. Or maybe you will have periods in your life where you're gonna slack. It's fine, it's normal. Well, Tolumnias will not grow as fast as for you to have to repot them every year or so or anything of the sorts, no. You're not gonna have all of a sudden a very big bush from a tiny little orchid. Not gonna happen. It's gonna take quite a number of years. But don't worry, these guys mature very fast. So even if you purchase more of a seedling, do I have one to show you? I think that one is a bit of a seedling. That one in the back. This guy, right? This is more of a seedling. Never bloomed. I do not see a flower spike. This growth is the biggest growth. At this age, it could bloom, now or the next growth. And that's gonna take a few months, like 6 months, a year or something like that. It's not gonna take forever. Imagine Cattleya seedlings. You're gonna wait for those Cattleyas 5 to 6 years, rest assured. Not for the Tolumnias. And as much as I see Tolumnias are being sold as a, let's say, semi-seedling, that sounds weird, pretty young age nonetheless, but they do not take a whole of a lot of time to bloom. You can have blooms in the first year, you can have blooms in the second. This particular Tolumnia that I have is blooming from an immature growth, so who knows, you can actually have blooms pretty fast. And in my opinion, that is a winning combo. So maybe this growing slow thing is not for everybody, but at some point I do believe the vast majority of people will appreciate plants that do not require trimming and tidying up and repotting very frequently. If you have particularly an inorganic medium that does not need replacing, if you can make it work with Tolumnias, you don't have to repot them for years and years. You're gonna be so happy with a Tolumnia maintenance-wise, trust me. Next up, you're gonna love this one. Blooms, or actually the bloom show itself, is bigger than the actual plant. Oh yes, sometimes much bigger. And this is, I think, the strong feature of the Tolumnia, why they are coveted by orchid collectors. Their bloom show is absolutely gorgeous, absolutely spectacular. They can produce very tall flower spikes with tiny little beautiful flowers. They can have branches, they can produce multiple spikes, and the plant is maybe a quarter or a third of the entire length of the flower spike. Depends on variety. Some of them will have shorter flower spikes, some longer, depends on the age as well, but many of them do have quite big inflorescences, which makes them so worth the money you spend on them. So judging by the flowers alone, they are so worth it. Yes, the flowers are not very big, although they are big again in comparison to the plant. They have the size and the shape of typical Oncidium, what people like to call the dancing ladies, that particular shape of the cherry baby, let's say. They have that shape and that actual size of a flower pretty much, but in miniature package, as you can see. Like, just imagine a cherry baby Oncidium next to a Tolumnia. The cherry baby does not fit in this compartment. Well, the flowers are the same size. How about that? So yeah, don't think there's any orchid beating Tolumnias when it comes to flowering. And not only that, the flowers come in various colors and patterns, not so much shapes. In the shape department, they're all pretty much the same. They have that oncidium type of shape, but it doesn't matter because they're all absolutely beautifully colored and they have the most wonderful dotted patterns sometimes. So yellows, reds, oranges, browns, whites, pinks, magentas. I don't think I've ever seen a blue one. I don't think it exists, or a black one, or a green one, but everything in between I have seen. Burgundies, maybe even a lime green, not lime green, but kind of like a lime yellow, maybe I think I did see. Many hybrids do revolve around the purples and the reds and the oranges, but there is a lot of variety, and considering that many of these Tolumnias are obtained from seeds, not tissue culture, because they are just growing so fast from seed, there is such variety when it comes to blooms. From the same, let's say, variety, named variety, you can have like 100 versions of that variety. It is absolutely spectacular. If you Google search Tolumnia orchid varieties, you'll see what I mean. You never know pretty much what you're gonna get, but everything is beautiful. I have not seen so-and-so Tolumnia. I'm not gonna say ugly because no orchid is ugly, but some of them are not necessarily my taste, right? Well, Tolumnias are all my taste. Here's another good trick about them. They do not need cool downs or variations in temperature or day length or anything of the sorts to rebloom. Do we remember Phalaenopsis actually need a little bit of a cool down? Well, these guys don't. As a matter of fact, these guys are growing in here with the lights on 12 hours a day, 12 hours off. You always need to provide nighttime for your orchid. Same pretty much temperature. It's a little bit warm in here because of the light, and especially when I close the door, but it's absolutely fine. They still bloom all year round. They do not necessarily have a season. They just bloom whenever a growth matures. So if you live in a climate or environment where you cannot really have variations in temperature and stuff, or maybe in day length, don't you worry. Tolumnias do not absolutely care about that. They will just bloom whenever they feel like it. And if that's not enough, yes, we're still on the blooms, the flowers can rebloom on secondary spikes, pretty much like Phalaenopsis. And I'm not referring to branches that grow at the same time with the main spike, no. The main flush of blooms can dry off, and then you can have another secondary branch just starting and flowering once again. Furthermore, I have had Tolumnias which bloom on secondary flower spikes differently, like completely differently. The first flush of blooms is orange, and then the secondary flush of blooms is completely yellow. Like, what the heck? What is going on? Yeah, they can do that. They're funny like that. How about it? They don't all do that, but I did have, I think, 2 of the hybrids that I had which did that. And it's always a surprise. I always love to see the secondary blooms on these guys as well. Now, the flowers don't last as long as Phalaenopsis, definitely, but that can be a good thing because you are not overly stressing this plant with overblooming. Even if it's blooming on secondary spikes, it's fine. It's not as prolific as a Phalaenopsis. So I wouldn't worry about that unless the orchid is very stressed or it doesn't have roots. It knows what it's doing pretty much. Let it bloom and enjoy the show. Alrighty, let's go back to care for these plants. Do you think they need humidity? I'll tell you, no, they do not need high humidity. And the fact that I keep them in this cabinet doesn't really offer them higher humidity or anything, because when I close the door, the gaps are just so big, there really isn't a different humidity level in this cabinet than there is in my entire grow space. And I measured it. There is absolutely no difference. And I really don't do anything to increase humidity for them. Will they say no to high humidity? No. No orchid will say no. But will they not care if you have low humidity? Yes, they will not care. The only thing you need to be careful with is watering. Obviously, they will dry faster, so you might need to water them more frequently, particularly because they are in small pots. But other than that, really, do not bother yourselves with humidifiers and other methods of increasing humidity, because they do not care. They just don't. They do very well without high humidity. And furthermore, they love average home temperatures and conditions generally. Now, they are more of a warm growing orchid, but this doesn't mean that you need to keep them hot or anything. Just don't keep them very cold. My temperature in my greenhouse, or actually grow room, goes down to 17-18 degrees Celsius. I'll put the equivalent in Fahrenheit on the screen, and they really do not bat an eyelash. They're absolutely fine with it. They still bloom, they still grow amazingly well. Even if they're not in this cabinet, I've had them all across this plant room and they grow just beautifully. The cabinet doesn't really make any difference, it's just a nice display. And yeah, they really could not care less about the temperatures. So I keep them in between 17 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius or things of the sort. Keep them warm in home conditions, keep them not in full sun, just behind a sheer curtain, something of the sorts, and they will do absolutely fine. They love bright light, they just cannot really tolerate intense sun if the leaves overheat. I can tell you that for sure. But wait! You do not have any type of sun at all or natural light in your home. Don't you worry, because they can grow strictly under grow lights or artificial light, whatever that may be, kitchen light, floodlights, whatever, they do not care. They grow in artificial light very well. My Tolumnias do not see natural daylight because this is the very, very distant corner of the plant room, next to my sink actually, which does not get any natural light. There isn't enough light to bounce from the walls either. It's pretty dark in here, I'm not gonna lie. Well, they do absolutely great under artificial light, never seeing the daylight. I also had them under kitchen lights. My observations are that generally speaking, plants do better under grow lights, under a light which has both red and blue peaks in their spectrum. So typically grow lights have those. I'm not sure if mine are very full spectrum or whatever they are, but they do provide a good light for my Tolumnias. And I use Barinas, by the way. I always mention them down below in the description. Not sponsored, I just like the lights. So yeah, if you don't have natural light, don't worry. Just put them under whatever lamp you have, they should be okay. Next up, oh, and this one I really like. They're not pest magnets. I don't want to jinx it right now. I don't think I've ever had pests on them. I mean, maybe a lot of years ago, maybe some spider mites, but they definitely were not the favorites. I mean, if they didn't have anything around, maybe they went on the Tolumnias, but do you guys remember any video of me showing a Tolumnia with grazing marks or anything of the sorts? I don't remember. I don't think it ever happened. I don't know if I ever had pests on them. Is it possible to have pests? Yes. But if you have other plants in your room, I don't think they're gonna choose the Tolumnias. I think they're gonna choose everything else, pretty much. I don't know, my Tolumnias have always been clean of pests. Even if they weren't in the cabinet, they were together with the other orchids. The pests just didn't choose them. And I'm guessing it's because of this very thick structure of the leaves. I think they have a very, very thick cuticle. Their leaves are actually succulent, which is not a problem for pests. They love succulent leaves, but they also seem to be protected by a thick cuticle. Doesn't feel appealing. Yeah, it feels very sturdy. So maybe pests really don't like the leaves of these guys and go for other plants. But anyway, that's a good thing, right? All right, when it comes to setups, this is a good one. They can grow in any setup you personally like and you personally do well, epiphyte-wise. They will not grow in soil, or at least it's very, very, very risky to grow them in soil. What I grow them in is something not everybody grows them in. I grow them in full sphagnum moss. Let me get a pot that better shows it. All right, there we go. I bumped the exposure here just to show you that this is moss. I don't have anything else in the pot. The bark is just on top and I only have moss. And guess what? It works. And it works so well. They're starting to grow out of the pots, which is fine, not to worry. Now, the only reason that for me they grow well in moss is because I live in a very warm climate that generally does well with orchids in moss. Tolumnias are not the only orchids I have in moss. I have pretty much everything else in moss as well, doing okay. It's not gonna work for everybody, obviously, depending on environment. If you live in the desert, like me, it's probably gonna work for you very well. Don't be scared to try sphagnum moss with them. Make sure it's not compacted when you pot them. Make sure it's fluffy and airy because they're epiphytes. But yeah, don't be afraid of sphagnum moss with Tolumnias. Whatever myths we had in the past, the long gone past, it's long gone past, you know? No, we've outgrown the knowledge, quote unquote, that Tolumnias need to be mounted, need to have air around their roots, otherwise they will die. No. If your environment works well with sphagnum moss, use sphagnum moss. If it doesn't, then use something else like bark. Bark is great, or cocoa husk, or even leca, I don't know, whatever works for you with other epiphytes, then that's what you should use with Tolumnias as well. Think of them as Phalaenopsis with more sensitive roots, because they're tinier and more fragile. Other than that, no. Don't treat them differently because that's the recipe for failure. Treat them like all epiphytes that you have. And if you do good generally mounted, then mount them. Sure, that's a blast. You just need to hose them down a little bit, maybe once a day, and hey presto, watering done. So just grow them however, don't overthink it. We're getting closely to the end. Oh, this is the last point that I have on my list. Okay, this is a funny one. They look like a monopodial and act like a sympodial because they are a sympodial orchid. This means that they do look a little bit like a vandaceous orchid, right? But guess what? They're sympodial. Imagine all of these fans are actually pseudobulbs connected through a rhizome. How good is that? There are benefits to being sympodial. If that makes any sense. There are benefits to us. You can definitely divide these orchids and propagate them. I would go as far as to say you can even divide individual fans if they're mature enough or if they have brand new roots forming. If the fans are tiny, that's a little bit more sketch. Do not divide individual fans if they're small, but I do believe maybe with an older fan, if it doesn't fit in the pot or you just want to play around with propagation and you have a lot of fans on your orchid, just remove one from the past, from the back. Yeah, go in the past and remove one. Pot it separately. It might actually start to sprout some new growths for you. Try it out, see how it goes. Don't go defan your orchids or anything, but if you have a spare fan, if you want to propagate a little bit, you want to play around with that, you can definitely do it because theoretically it should absolutely work. If you want to properly divide them, at least 2-3 fans per division, that should be great. It should take off for you just fine if the orchid is mature enough and it has enough roots. So looks like a monopodial, divides like a sympodial, because it is a sympodial. How fun is that? And it also always creates new roots from the new growths. Imagine if something happens to the old fans, it's okay. Remove the old fans, you have the newer fans which will produce roots. Don't worry about it. We're not dependent on one single fan here. If you rot one of the older fans, if you put water in the top and it lingers there and promotes rotting, it's okay. Do not worry, just remove that fan, even if it's in the middle. Remove it from the base, treat it with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide, 3%, maybe a little cinnamon there, and that's about it. The other fans should be fine and should continue to produce roots and grow. How about that? Crown rot with second chances is what the Tolumnia offers us. And yeah, that's about it for my pros list. I have a few cons as well, as I was saying, that I think you should be aware of. I can overlook them, but maybe some of you will not. First off, not present in flower shops, generally speaking. Maybe some of you will be lucky enough to have these plants in flower shops, but where I live in Europe, I haven't seen the miracle happen yet. We're still hoping for the past 10 years, but nothing yet. So you definitely need to go to either individual sellers, either reputable nurseries, the latter being obviously a lot more advisable. Luckily though, they are quite common. At least some varieties most nurseries will have. But hey, if that's what we gotta do, that's what we gotta do, because for many of us, the only option at the flower shop is the Phalaenopsis, so everything else, we kind of need to go to the nursery anyway, so maybe it's not such a con after all. Next up, they take a long time to recover, and I do actually have a complete beginner tutorial on Tolumnias. You can check it down below where I mentioned this at length, I guess, but they take a long time to recover. If you lose the root system, oh brother, you're in for, are you okay? My doves just landed weirdly. So yeah, you're in for a wait. Sorry you guys, but they take a long time to recover if they become rootless. When they are established, they're super strong, they're glorious. But if by a misfortune of the universe, they lose their roots, which can sometimes happen, and there's no roots on the way, oh, the setback is real. You're in for a wait, but it's worth it, trust me, the wait is worth it. And of course, if I had to choose a soft spot, it's the root system, but not in the way of it doesn't adapt or anything. No, if the root system starts to grow, it starts to grow. It doesn't have any type of issues. Think about them as cattleyas. If the root system gets bruised or attacked or something happens to it, it most likely will not survive. If the velamen is cracked, it's not gonna survive, and things of the sorts. They have very sensitive roots, which makes them so set back when they have an issue with their root system, and that's the sad reality. That's the biggest con with them. You have to be careful with the roots, especially when you repot them. Best time to repot them is when you see brand new roots forming. That's when you know that at least you're gonna have some new roots to depend on. If you completely mess up the older roots, which can happen, don't worry about it. Or choose setups that you don't really have to play around with too much. My setup, it is sphagnum moss, yes, but it's a very, very good quality sphagnum moss that theoretically should last me for 3 years. And these guys do not grow fast, so 3 years, I will not have to touch them, which is great. And I repotted these in April this year. Takes a while for them to adapt. See, not all of them have roots everywhere in the pot, but they're good. They're gonna grow, no worries. Also, when it comes to unpotting and removing the old medium, the sphagnum moss is a joy to remove. It doesn't really damage roots. It's like a pillow. It's very, very soft. Imagine having to remove pieces of bark from the roots. And a little bark on top, it's no big deal. But the entire pot being bark, oh no. I would destroy, obliterate the root system. I would have a sulking orchid for the next 4 years. I'm not even kidding. I have an orchid here. It bloomed recently. I have a Tolumnia that I've had for 5 to 6 years, and I continuously bothered it. It wasn't happy with me, so it decided not to do much for 6 years. And finally, this year, when I piped down with my experiments on its roots, it kind of took off and bloomed for me for the very first time after 6 years. Yeah, that can happen. But the good thing about messing up and being our fault is that we can control what we do, right? If it's my fault, I can control it to not be my fault anymore, right? So that's a good thing. Try as much as possible to choose your setup wisely. Think about it in advance. Yes, you might have a good time with them mounted, but when it's time to unmount them, it's not gonna be a good time, trust me. So maybe invest in ceramic mounts or things that don't necessitate you to remove them anytime soon. Inorganic setups for Tolumnias are great if you find one that has synergy with you. I haven't found something that I completely enjoy, so I'm sticking with my sphagnum moss, but if you find something that works out for you, use it. It will be the best thing you do for them, because that setback is real, you guys. It's absolutely horrendous. Other than that, they're the perfect orchid. With that little tiny little con of being set back for 5 years. Other than that, they're just perfect. Am I right? All right, so with that said, let's end it here. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. Let me know if you have Tolumnias, what you think about them. What was your experience with them? Let us know. Share your experience with us so we know what to expect, because I've made such a good advertising commercial for them, right? And some of you guys, I'm sure, have horror stories with them, so we need to see all sides of the story, right? Put them down below in the comment section so we all know. Righty guys, so thank you so much for watching again. Hope you have a great day. By the way, if you're into aquariums and stuff, check out my second channel where I post only aquarium stuff from now on. It's linked down below always. But for orchid stuff and other houseplants, subscribe to this channel. And with that said, I'll see you next time. Bye!